while studying about this muscle, we have studied about 2-3 points. That is, a muscle is actually composed of two kinds of filaments. One is known as the actin filament, other is known as the myosin filament. So during a muscle contraction, there can be two stages. One is a contraction, other is a relaxation. So this is how the relaxed muscle will be normally appearing. Okay, and you may be remembering about the structure of muscle which I have discussed earlier. These points you may be remembering. That is, every muscle has a unit, as a individual unit called by the name sarcomere. Sarcomere is the unit of muscle contraction, and if you take a sarcomere, there will be a kind of myofilament known by the name myosin, which are thicker in nature, and there is a very thin filament which we call by the name actin filament. And during a muscle contraction, basically this actin filament will be coming closer into the myosin filament. There is no actual decrease in the length of either myosin filament or actin filament. What is normally happening is that one will be pulled into the area of other. That's simply what is happening. Now, this is the basic mechanism of muscle contraction. Here you can find when a muscle is relaxed, you can see that its actin filaments are further apart from each other. So here you can see that this is a relaxed muscle. The actin filaments are very far away from each other, and you can also see that this is the Z line. Z line will be also very far away from each other. Now during the contraction, what is happening is that this actin filaments will be coming closer. Similarly, the Z line will be also coming. See, if you compare these two diagrams, this is the first diagram which explains how a relaxed muscle is appearing. Now in the second case, you can see that the muscles, there is a partial overlapping or partial contraction is that, so that the actin filaments are moving into the middle of the myosin filament. Now in the third stage here, you can see that actin filaments have completely entered into the area of the myosin filament. So there is a complete overlap is the. So as a result of that, this length of this sarcomere, or the distance between the two Z line, will be gradually decreasing. So these are the three diagrams which are explaining how a muscle is actually contracting. So one point you have to keep in your mind is that during a muscle contraction, there will not be any decrease in the length of either actin filament or myosin filament. What is happening is that actin filament will be entering into the area of myosin filament. So this is how a muscle is normally contracting. So here all three diagrams are, see, this is a relaxed muscle, and this is a partial contraction, and this is a complete contraction. So this is the Z line, and region between two Z line is known by the name sarcomere. So during a muscle contraction, there will be a decrease in the length of sarcomere. So sarcomere is considered as the basic unit of muscle contraction. So each muscle will be composed of several thousand sarcomere units, and all these units are contracting. There will be an overall decrease in the length of the muscle. This is how we are seeing about the muscle contraction. Then how this whole process is actually taking place. Here you can see that this is the actin filament and this is the myosin filament. And what happens is that myosin will be having a head-like portion, and this head-like portion can attach with the, see, this is the head-like portion, and head-like portion can attach with this actin filament, and it will be, this is like, it will be attaching the actin filament and you will be pulling it. So by that kind of pulling action of the myosin head, actin will be coming into the region of the myosin. So this is the myosin and this is the actin. So what we have noticed is that actin is actually moving into the area of myosin, or actins are pulled into the region of the myosin, and this is how this pulling action is taking place. So actin myosin will be having certain head portion. See here, you can see that. So this is another picture. So in a muscle contraction, this is the myosin. You can see that number of unit of element components are involved. Then, so basically in a muscle contraction, what happens is that the laterally projecting heads of the myosin filament come in contact with the actin filament and rotate on them. See, so this is how the all process is going. So that is, this is the myosin filament, and each myosin filament will be having several side projections like this, and these are known as the head of the myosin, and this head will be attaching with the actin filament and will be pulling the actin filament into the middle of the myosin. So this is how the all process of myosin muscle contraction is that is, during a muscle contraction, laterally projecting head or cross bridges of myosin will be coming in contact with the actin filament. Here you can see that these are the head or cross bridges, and that will be attaching with actin, and it will be pulling the actin into the region of the myosin. And since this kind of pulling or sliding is taking place, we are calling it by the name sliding movement, and this theory is also known by the name sliding filament theory. So that is the reason why it is known as a sliding filament theory, because there is no only sliding of actin. Here you can see that this is what is really happened. There is only sliding of actin into the region of the myosin. As a result of that sliding of actin into the region of myosin, the length of the myosin or length of the muscle will be gradually decreasing. So this process is what is happening in any muscle contraction. And you can also see that number of chemical reactions are also involved, especially calcium ions are playing a very important role. And here you can see that in a muscle contraction, and this is how the energy for a muscle contraction is actually taking place. So what you have to keep in your mind is that this pulling of actin into the myosin needs some energy. How that energy is actually created, and for that you have to understand that energy is always created by the splitting of a molecule known by the name ATP. When an ATP molecule is splitting into ADP molecule and inorganic phosphate, a certain portion of energy will be released. Here you can see that. I will show you that picture. See, if you look at this picture again, here you can see that. Here, this attachment of myosin head or myosin cross bridges with actin needs some energy, and one phosphate is released, and ATP will be converted into ADP, and certain amount of energy is also released. That energy is actually used for this pulling of actin into the myosin region. So that is how this working of this the chemical energy is actually produced during a muscle contraction. So here you can see that the muscle contraction also needs a certain energy. Here you can see that the muscle contains an enzyme known by the name myosin ATPase, and this myosin ATPase will be working on ATP molecule, converting it into ADP, one inorganic phosphate, and certain amount of energy. That is the energy which is used by muscle for contraction. So here you can see that when a muscle is contracting, certain amount of ATP will be always used. That ATP has to be recreated. Otherwise what happens is that muscle will not be having enough ATP for further contraction. So in order to that, so the use of ATP has to be restored for additional contraction. So during every pulling action of actin into the myosin filament, you can see there is certain small amount of energy is actually utilized, and as a result ADP is formed. That ADP has to be converted back into ATP again. Then only the next muscle contraction can take place. So that is whatever ATP molecule are produced are utilized during a muscle contraction, it has to be recreated. and that recreation of ATP from ADP is actually by utilizing a high energy phosphate bond. So there is a high energy phosphate bond, and this high energy phosphate bond is actually supplying a certain amount of inorganic phosphate, and that inorganic phosphate, that reaction of converting ATP back into ATP is actually facilitated by an enzyme known by the name creatine kinase. So it is by the action of creatine kinase that the use of ATP is again recreated from ADP. So this is how the here you can see that this is the ADP. ADP will be taking one molecule from creatine phosphate in presence of an enzyme known by the name creatine kinase, and we are getting ATP and we are also getting creatine. So when creatine phosphate is used up, new ATP is again generated by aerobic respiration in the muscle cell. So if ATP is used faster than muscle fiber can produce, then muscle start aerobic respiration, and this is producing lactic acid. So here you can just read this sentence, that is, during a muscle contraction ATP is actually used. ATP will be converted into ADP and energy is released, and that ATP has to be recreated. That is, the whatever when an ATP is converting into ADP, this ADP molecule has to be converted back into ADP. For that, muscle is using a molecule called creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate will be supplying one phosphate into ADP in presence of an enzyme known by the name creatine kinase, and ATP can be created. Here a creatine will be formed as a byproduct. Now sometimes what happens is that this is how the normal reaction is all going on. Sometimes when the muscle is contracting very fast, that is especially during running, jumping or other kind of exercise, our body may not be able to get sufficient quantity of oxygen to conduct this process in a smooth way. And during that stage, what our body will be doing is that body will be utilizing your body will be moving to another method of respiration known by the name anaerobic respiration, and using anaerobic respiration simply means an air respiration in the absence of oxygen, and during during a process that does not contain oxygen, and the ATP will be again produced, but that has a problem. It will be producing lot of lactic acid. So that lactic acid, along with the lactic acid, phosphoric acid both will be accumulating in our muscle, and that is leading to muscle fatigue and also muscle pain that we are feeling. So what happens is that after a while body will be continuously taking more oxygen than the normal level of oxygen it is taking, and this process of removing all the lactic acid in a slow process is known by the name oxygen debt and recovery from oxygen debt. So lactic acid is diffused into blood, leaving a small part to accumulate in the muscle fiber, and this is how the energy produced. See here you can see the lactic acid will be converting with oxygen, and as a result of that conversion, lactic acid will be converted into carbon dioxide, water and ATP. So even from a lactic acid, body is producing certain form of energy in the form of ATP, and remaining lactic acid will be reacting with water, and it will be converted into glycogen, where it is stored in the liver cell. So this is how the all process is actually taking place. So this is the details of the mechanism of the muscle contraction. Now I will show you how this muscle is actually contracting.